night, and he decided that, he wanted to make a show like that too. So he set up a video camera in his living room, and he started making a satirical news show. And just after Hosni Mubarak was deposed is when his show really started taking off. Egyptians wanted comedy. They wanted satire. And so he started off with a few viewers, and then it became 10,000, and then it became 100,000, and then it became a couple million. And the Egyptian television producers saw this opportunity, and then they gave him a show of his own on television. Now that's fantastic. He was actually Time Magazine's Person of the Year he was one of the top 100 people of the year a couple of years ago. So Bassem continued his work until 2012, when the Morsi government detained him for insulting the president and insulting Islam and reporting false news. He was released and fined, and he continued doing it for a while. But just this past summer, after General el-Sisi became president, the show was forced to close. And this is what Bassem said. He said, and I quote, "Fear sells, fear works. And when people are afraid, they won't accept logic, let alone satire." Now, he's making a point that's not lost on many other world leaders. Because we know that throughout human history, methods of communication that were free and open, anything that's this powerful, isn't always embraced by governments, monarchs, or the police, or those with power. To the contrary, they're very often shut down, monitored, or put back in their bottles. So it shouldn't be any surprise to us that the governments today, that many of them, the same governments that were used to having their own censors in the newsrooms and in the television studios, aren't exactly thrilled about this incredibly powerful tool called the internet. They too see how the internet is transferring power from giant institutions to any user. So if you're a dictator, of course, and you're used to controlling this traditional media, the question is, what does your worst nightmare look like? And I think it looks a lot like this, right? And that's exactly what we've seen happen around the world. And so as a result, nations like Cuba and North Korea have just blocked the internet wholesale. Others have turned to filtering and censorship. The most famous example, of course, is China, where, the government's steady and measurable increase in censorship had led to Google eventually moving its search functions out of China. Now, of course, there are other countries on the spectrum as well. There are larger Western nations and others like the Philippines, Australia, Chile, and governments that have worked very hard to generally maintain a free and open internet. So we've got two ends of the spectrum. But the reality is that the greatest number of countries and a lot of users in these countries fall somewhere in between. In fact, almost a third of all internet users live in countries where there is substantial or pervasive filtering and censorship of online content. And at Google, our own services like Gmail and YouTube have been blocked wholesale in at least 32 countries at one point or another. And there's a list. We call this internally, our Hall of Fame. These are countries that have blocked our services at one time or another. And you can check out more information. We list all of this information online at google.com/transparency report. Now, ultimately, I think these countries are going around and they're sticking their fingers in the dam. They're trying to stop the inevitable. They're chasing down website owners. They're tracking users. They're shutting down VPNs, and they're trying to stay ahead of the game. But the question is, like, how many government officials does it take to unscrew 1 billion web pages, right? And the answer is there aren't enough. So it's a lot easier to break up a protest of a couple thousand people than it is to stop a Twitter bomb of 20 million. While government officials are working to restrict the internet within their own borders, a lot of them are also joining together at the UN and other international organizations to try and do what none of these countries can do on their own, which is block and control the global internet. Over and over again, they're trying to turn the internet over to UN regulation. And thankfully, they failed. And so what we're seeing now is what we call censorship 2.0 at Google. You know, there was the censoring and the filtering, which is continuing. And now these governments are increasingly looking to criminalize speech and use the full powers of, you know, legislation and regulatory authority. And in some cases, they're imprisoning bloggers and users directly. In 2012, President Putin signed the first of what would be a litany of new regulations regulating the internet in that country, often under the guise of things like national security or things that are harmful to children. And they came up with a list of websites that were banned as, quote, harmful to Russia's youth. And I don't think anyone in the room would be surprised that most of the websites on that list were actually owned by opposition parties to the Putin government. So an increasing number of countries are also holding middlemen responsible for this information. You know, anything that passes over their networks, you know, organizations, companies like Google, YouTube, any news sites are being held responsible for whatever passes over their networks or whatever is posted online. They're holding a newspaper site responsible for any user comment that they don't like, because it's much easier to go to that newspaper site than it is to track down those individual users. In Brazil, one of Google's own executives was arrested for that purpose. In Brazil, they have these laws that within a few months before an election, you can't criticize or say anything inappropriate about an elected politician. You know, and some governments, as I said earlier, are increasingly using physical violence against people who post content online. The Committee to Protect Journalists reports that half of all the journalists in prison today are bloggers. An organization that Google partners with, called Freedom House, publishes an annual Freedom on the Net report and found that in the past few years, internet freedom has declined substantially in 34 of the 60 countries that it studied. Now, I believe that there's one simple reality that these countries don't get, that the power of the internet, the power for economic development, for social advancement, is very much driven by its openness. You can't change the internet, you can't change the fundamentally free and open nature of the internet and have it still be the internet. It's just something completely different. It'd be like trying to airbrush the smile off the Mona Lisa and call it the Mona Lisa. It's just not the same thing. So there's the web that's free and open, and there's something else concocted by government officials. And at Google, we think it's important to fight for the internet as it is, free and open. Now, the question I often get is, why does Google care about this? Why does my team at Google even exist? And, you know, to be honest, there are a couple different reasons. And the first, to be completely honest with you and upfront, is that it's the right thing and it's good for Google. It's good for our business. And it's very simple. The bigger and more robust the internet is, the more users online posting content, the more users going online, the more likely people are to use our services. And that's great for us, and we love that. And I don't think we need to shy away from the fact that a big, robust, free, and open internet is great for Google's business. But it's also right for our users. And if there's one thing that everyone who works at Google knows, it's this mantra of do what's right for the user. Put the user first. Whether you're designing a product or you're working in government affairs, put the user first, and everything else will follow. And that's held largely true. And the fact is that our users want and expect a free and open internet. They want as few barriers, as few people standing between them and the information they want, and as few people standing between them and the communication they want to have with other users as possible. So putting the user first is very much a reason why we fight for these issues. And the third reason is that we really believe that a free and open internet is right for society itself. And our founders, Larry and Sergey, from the very beginning said that we were going to be a company that thinks differently, that we're going to do things differently and try and do the right thing. And the term free expression or free internet, free and open internet, may sound like a relic of some Cold War, but it really is the foundation for expanding entire economies, for advancing societies, and for driving social and political movements. When the internet is curtailed, the hopes and the dreams and the aspirations of people are destroyed. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 19, says, quote, and this was back in the 40s, but listen, everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes the freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers. So that was written in the 40s, and it couldn't be more apt for today's world. Now, the internet, as I said before, is absolutely critical for business and for economic development. The internet accounted for 21% of GDP growth in developed nations over the last 5 years. That's an incredible amount of economic activity. So that's why we're in this fight. But it isn't a fight, the reason I'm here tonight is it isn't a fight for internet nerds like me, right? This is a fight for all of us. Everyone has something at stake because the internet is a part of all of our lives. Think of a presidential candidate, and if he or she doesn't use the internet, don't start measuring the drapes, right? Any company that doesn't think of itself as an internet company, I don't care how small or big it is or what line of industry it's in, if it doesn't think of itself as an internet company, that's not a company that I want to be involved in or that I want to hold stock in. And same thing, and most importantly, any country that doesn't have a free and open internet is really an economy in a country that's going to be left behind. And there's a direct correlation about these issues. Estonia was recently ranked, tiny Estonia, former Soviet bloc country, was recently ranked #1 in internet freedom in the world, a couple slots ahead of the United States. And its freedoms are accompanied by the highest GDP per person of any former Soviet bloc country. And we commissioned a study at Google that charted a country's approach to the internet with regulations and legislative approaches and its GDP growth. And there is almost a direct one-to-one correlation between those two things. And now we're trying to move forward and prove causality and use this as a tool when we meet with governments around the world. By 2016, the internet is expected to contribute $4.2 trillion of economic value in the G20 countries alone. You simply can't reach new customers. You can't do anything if you're a business without being an internet company. You can't reach new customers. You can't market your products. Your employees can't communicate with each other without the internet. So if we agree that a free and open internet is the foundation for a better future, then it becomes a little bit more clear who has to fight for this. As individuals, I think we all have a responsibility to take action, to speak up when our governments or others encroach on the internet as we currently know and use it. And internet censorship isn't a problem that any particular industry or advocacy group, certainly no individual company, can fight on its own. So there are a couple things that I think we can start thinking about with more particularity. I think we should demand that governments be transparent about how they restrict information and monitor their citizens. Governments that request and demand information about users from technology companies should also allow those companies to make that information public. Even better would be if they would publish their own information about the demands that they make of technology companies. We also need to be sure that governments apply the same rules and laws that apply offline to the online world. For example, today, if a law enforcement official wants access to a hard copy letter in your home, he or she has to get a search warrant. That's not the case for email. Why is there that distinction? International trade agreements have to be modernized to recognize the reality of the global economy as well. And they have to treat the free flow of information and data across borders the same way they fight for the free flow of steel and agricultural products and cars. And that means that restrictions on the internet should be treated the same way that we treat unfair trade barriers and tariffs. These are just a couple steps that we can start to think about our own involvement and our own engagement. Because we're mobilizing not only to protect the internet for ourselves, but we're also protecting the 4.5 billion people who aren't yet connected. And the way that mobile technology is going, they will connect. It's just a matter of time. That's going to happen. But the question is to what type of internet, to what type of network will they connect? Will it be the internet that we've enjoyed to date here in the US that allows us to connect and allows our companies to do business globally? Or will it be the sort of network that reminds us more of the Cold War, where there are countries who enjoy free and open internet and those who are behind, instead of an iron curtain, a fiber curtain, where those people don't enjoy those same rights and freedoms that we enjoy. For me, I think the choice is clear. The future can't be about an internet that's filtered or censored or fragmented. It can't be one that takes the power that internet users currently have and puts it back into the hands of a few government officials or a few media moguls or a few politicians. It's got to be an internet where Bassem Youssef can upload a video and do a show that inspires millions. And it has to be one where entrepreneurs here in Manchester, like Dine, can reach customers all around the world, whether they're in China or Russia or Africa. One where students here can see lectures and talk to researchers at other universities all around the world. And it's got to be an internet that empowers my niece, Eleanor, to truly be a world citizen, to make friends on every continent, to teach or learn anywhere without ever having to set foot on an airplane. And we want this because when she grows up, whatever she chooses to do, I want her to have the world at her fingertips through the internet. So thanks for listening, and thanks for being here tonight. And I think we're going to have a panel next, and I'll welcome any questions that you have. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ross. I'll invite our panel of experts to join you on stage and continue the conversation, and then be thinking, because we'll open it up to questions from all of you. So our first panelist is Cameron Schilling, a director in McLean Law Firm's litigation department and chair of its privacy and data security group. Welcome, Cameron. Paul Malott leads the BizOps team at Dine and is also in charge of sales and marketing operations, as well as the company's global offices in Australia and the UK. Welcome, Paul. And Dr. Charlotte Brodden has been a professor of international business and organizational leadership at SNHU since 2006. Following 2 decades of corporate experience both domestically and internationally. Welcome, Charlotte. So I'm going to pose the first question to Cameron, and then you can all chime in. From your perspective as a lawyer at McLean, how do you see internet freedom and security issues affecting local businesses and their clients, especially considering all that Ross has touched on tonight?
Well, thank you. Thanks for starting off with me.